7:15 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. A Russian Su-35 was already screaming through Mach 1.2. Major Volkov, callsign Raven 4-1, watched the distance to his target close with predatory efficiency. This was not a routine intercept. Usually, the NATO pilots were eager to show their skill, banking hard or flashing their sensor pods to signal awareness. Today, the British Typhoon ahead of him was doing something far more unsettling. It was doing nothing at all. The question occupied every inch of Volkov's focus. Why was a frontline British interceptor flying a steady, unwavering course toward restricted airspace without a single radio response? The air at 36,000 feet was a pale, frozen blue. Below the cockpit, the Baltic Sea looked like a sheet of hammered lead, cold and indifferent to the machines screaming above it. Volkov adjusted his oxygen mask. He felt the familiar, heavy pressure of the G-suit against his legs. His gloved thumb rested just millimeters from the weapon release button on his flight stick. Volkov spoke into his mask. "Control. This is Raven 4-1. I am in visual range. The target is a Typhoon fighter. Speed is 400 knots. Altitude is 36,000 feet. The response from the Combat Information Center in Kaliningrad was immediate. Raven 4-1. This is Control. Confirm target behavior. Is he reacting to your presence? Negative. Volkov replied. His voice was a flat, professional drone. He is flying as if on rails. No maneuvers, no signals. He is maintaining a heading of 045. He is ignoring the buffer zone. Inside the command center in Kaliningrad, the atmosphere was rigid. Officers moved between glowing consoles with a practiced, quiet urgency. They had seen provocations before. They had seen tactical probes where NATO aircraft pushed the limits of the border to test response times. But those pilots were always active. They were always watching. This aircraft was behaving like a ghost. 600 miles to the west, at the Combined Air Operations Center in Ramstein, Germany, the mood was equally grim. High-ranking officers stood behind rows of analysts, staring at the same two digital blips on a massive wall display. They knew their pilot, a flight lieutenant with 1,200 hours, in the cockpit, had stopped responding to all encrypted bursts 10 minutes ago. To the Russians, it looked like a silent, defiant intrusion. To the British, it looked like a tragedy in motion. Volkov pulled his Su-35 closer. He was now within 30 meters of the Typhoon. This was the danger zone, where a single pocket of wake turbulence could send both jets into a fatal tumble. He leveled his wings and looked across the narrow gap of freezing air. He wanted to see the British pilot's face. He wanted to see a helmet turn, or a gloved hand wave a greeting. He saw nothing but the morning sun reflecting off the gold-tinted canopy of the Typhoon. The cockpit looked still. Too still. The Russian pilot's jaw tightened. He was now less than 4 minutes from the edge of sovereign airspace. If the Typhoon crossed that line, Volkov's orders were absolute. He would have to arm his missiles. He would have to pull the trigger. On a pilot who seemed to be already dead at the controls. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:21 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. Major Volkov eased his Su-35 closer to the silent British fighter. He moved with the delicate precision of a surgeon, his left hand making micro-adjustments to the throttle. He was now less than 20 meters away. At this distance, the roar of his own engines felt like a physical weight, yet the aircraft beside him remained eerily steady. This was the moment of identification. This was where the uncertainty was supposed to end. Volkov looked across the void. Control. I am established on his left wing. I am beginning a visual inspection of the cockpit. Copy. Raven 4-1. The controller in Kaliningrad replied, report any signs of life. Report configuration of the aircraft.
Confirming visual identification.
He noticed a detail that sent a chill through his flight suit. The Typhoon's landing lights were extended and illuminated. In the bright daylight of the Baltic, they were brilliant, unnecessary beacons. In the international language of the sky, this was an emergency signal. It was a cry for help from a machine that could no longer speak. 7:23 in the morning, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. The Combat Operations Center was a hive of controlled desperation. General Marcus Thorne stood before the primary tactical map. The two icons, one blue and one red, were merged into a single flickering point on the screen. They were now 30 miles from the Russian border. Still no response on the guard frequency? Thorne asked. His voice was low, carrying the weight of a man watching a catastrophe unfold in real time. Nothing, sir, the communications officer replied. We have tried every encrypted channel. We have tried the emergency transponder codes. The pilot is not acknowledging. We are designating the flight as a zombie. His oxygen levels should have lasted another 3 hours, but we have no telemetry. On his life support. Thorne looked at the Russian icon. The Sukhoi is sitting right on his wing. If they think this is a coordinated penetration of their airspace, they will drop him the moment he hits the 12-mile limit. Get on the deconfliction line. Tell them we have a pilot in distress. Tell them we are not in control of that aircraft. 7:25 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. Volkov was now so close he could see the flight suit of the British pilot. He looked for the movement of a head. He looked for the rise and fall of a chest. The pilot was slumped forward, his helmet resting near the edge of the control display. The aircraft was being flown by its automated systems, a digital brain keeping it level while the human inside was lost to the dark. Volkov spoke into his mask. Control. The pilot is incapacitated. I repeat, the pilot is unconscious or deceased. He is slumped over the controls. Confirm. Raven 4-1. Kaliningrad replied. A new voice came over the radio, deeper and more authoritative. It was the sector commander. We have received a flash message from the Americans. They claim a technical failure. However, the target is still on a heading for the naval base at Baltic. We cannot allow an unguided weapon of that size to overfly the fleet. Volkov looked at the Typhoon. It was a beautiful, lethal machine. Without a pilot, it was just 20 tons of aluminum, fuel, and high explosives moving at 500 miles per hour toward a target it was never meant to hit. Raven 4-1, the commander continued. You are authorized to use any means necessary to divert the aircraft. If it reaches the 20-mile mark, you are cleared to engage and destroy. Do you copy? Volkov looked at the unconscious man in the cockpit. He looked at the border on his navigation screen. The 20-mile mark was less than 90 seconds away. I copy, Volkov said. I am moving to a firing position. The Su-35 pulled back, its nose rising as it prepared to roll into a kill solution. 7:28 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. Major Volkov dropped his Su-35 into the firing slot. He was now 2 kilometers behind the Typhoon. On his head-up display, the green box of the infrared seeker began to dance over the heat signature of the British engines. It was a perfect lock. The missile was ready to fly. The pilot was ready to die. Volkov spoke to himself. Wake up. Please. Wake up. He did not say it over the radio. He kept his professional mask tight. He was a weapon of the state. He was a guardian of the border. But he was also a pilot who knew the man in the other cockpit had a name and a family. The 20-mile limit was approaching. The countdown on his screen showed 60 seconds to the point of no return. 7:31 in the morning. The sky over the Baltic. A new contact appeared on Volkov's radar. It was coming from the west at high speed. It was not squawking a civilian code. It was moving at Mach 1.4, cutting through the thin air with aggressive intent. Control. This is Raven 4-1, Volkov said. I have a second contact. Bearing 270. Range 40 miles. He is closing fast. The controller in Kaliningrad responded with iron in his voice. Raven 4-1. We see him. It is an aircraft from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, designated Guardian 1. It is likely an F-35 Lightning. Stay on your target. We are vectoring Raven 4-2 and 4-3 to intercept the newcomer. The sky was becoming crowded. What had begun as a tragic accident was turning into a tactical chess match. 3 more Russian fighters were scrambling from the runway at Kaliningrad. Their afterburners carved white scars into the morning sky. 7:34 in the morning. The Combat Information Center. The room was vibrating with the sound of incoming data. The sector commander stared at the screen. He saw the F-35 closing on Volkov. He saw his own reinforcements rising to meet it. This was the classic recipe for a mid-air collision or a frantic, mistaken engagement. The commander picked up the secure line to the Western Command Center. "This is Kaliningrad sector. You are sending an armed fighter toward our interceptor. If he crosses the line, we will engage. Tell your pilot to maintain distance." The voice from Ramstein was urgent. "Kaliningrad, this is Guardian Control. Our pilot is not there to engage. He is there to provide a visual wake-up call to the Typhoon. He is carrying a specialized high-intensity strobe. Do not fire. I repeat, do not fire." The commander looked back at the map. The Typhoon was now 18 miles from the coast. The F-35 was 10 miles from Volkov. The clock was running out of seconds. Volkov watched the F-35 on his sensor screen. He saw the American jet roll over and dive toward the Typhoon. It was a desperate move. It was a gamble that relied on Volkov's restraint. "He is inside 5 miles, Volkov reported. His hand was shaking slightly on the stick. "I have a lock on the Typhoon. I have a lock on the F-35. Control, give me a decision." The silence from the radio was the loudest thing in the cockpit. The decision was no longer with the generals. It was with the man with his finger on the trigger. The F-35 pulled alongside the silent Typhoon. It began to fire its flares, bright magnesium stars falling through the blue air. It was a wall of fire meant to shock a sleeping man back to life. Volkov held his breath. The border was 10 miles away. 7:36 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The F-35 Lightning surged ahead, its dark, jagged silhouette cutting through the wake of the Typhoon. Inside the cockpit of Guardian 1, the American pilot squeezed a trigger on his side stick. A volley of magnesium flares erupted from the belly of the jet. They burned with a blinding, white-hot intensity, drifting past the Typhoon's canopy like falling stars. "Wake up, Typhoon," the American pilot whispered. "Brake left, brake right, just do something." 600 meters behind them, Major Volkov felt the heat signature of the flare's bloom on his sensors. His infrared seeker screamed a warning. The Su-35's computer was struggling to differentiate between the decoy flares and the engines of the two fighters. Volkov reached down and toggled his radar to a manual override. He was no longer letting the machine make the decisions. "Control, this is Raven 4-1, Volkov said. His voice was tight. "The F-35 is engaging in aggressive maneuvering within the buffer zone. He is deploying countermeasures. My systems are intermittent. I am losing the picture." Raven 4-1. "Maintain your lock," the controller in Kaliningrad replied. "We are authorized to protect the border. If the F-35 crosses the 12-mile limit with the target, you are to engage both. Repeat. You are cleared to engage both contacts." 7:38 in the morning. The Combat Information Center. The sector commander in Kaliningrad stood with his hands gripped behind his back. He watched the digital plot. The blue icons of the NATO jets were now just 8 miles from the coast of the Russian enclave. On the horizon, the gray shapes of the Baltic fleet were already visible. The sailors on those ships were looking up. They were seeing the white trails of the jets and the sudden flashes of the flares. "Sir," an analyst said, turning from his console, "the F-35 is slowing down. He is trying to force the Typhoon to stall. If he drops the aircraft's speed, it will lose lift and fall into the sea before it hits the coast." The commander did not blink. "Or he is positioning himself to shielding the Typhoon from our missiles. It is a tactical screen. Tell Volkov to prepare for a kinetic intercept. No more warnings." 7:40 in the morning. The sky over the Baltic. Volkov saw the American pilot move into a dangerous position. The F-35 was now flying directly in front of the Typhoon's nose. It was a maneuver known as a thump. The American was using his engine wash to create massive turbulence. He was trying to physically shake the silent British jet. The Typhoon began to vibrate. Its wings rocked violently. For a second, the nose of the British fighter dipped. "He is moving," Volkov said. "The target is reacting to the turbulence." Inside the Typhoon cockpit, the pilot's head rolled to the side. His oxygen mask was slightly askew. The sudden, violent shaking of the airframe had dislodged him from the flight display. Slowly, one gloved hand began to twitch. It rose from his lap, moving toward the throttle quadrant with the heavy, sluggish motion of a man underwater. Control. I see movement, Volkov reported. The pilot is conscious, but he is not in control. The Typhoon did not turn. Instead, its engines roared as the automated flight system reacted to the loss of altitude. It surged forward, accelerating directly toward Volkov's Sukhoi. The gap between the Russian and the British jets vanished in a heartbeat. Brake! 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 The American pilot screamed over the open guard channel. Volkov slammed his stick to the right. The G-force hit him like a physical blow, pinning him into his seat. The Typhoon flashed past him, missing his wingtip by less than 5 meters. The two fighters had nearly collided over the center of the Baltic. The line had not just been reached, it had been shattered. 7:42 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The near miss left a vacuum of sound in the cockpit. Major Volkov felt the blood rushing back to his head after the 6 G-force turn. His Su-35 was vibrating from the sheer violence of the maneuver. The air inside his mask was thick with the scent of ozone and recycled oxygen. He checked his mirrors. The Typhoon was still there. It was still climbing. The British fighter was no longer flying a straight line. It was now oscillating. The flight computer was fighting against the heavy, unconscious weight of the pilot resting on the control stick. Volkov spoke into his radio. His voice was forced. Control. Raven 4-1 is back in position. That was too close. The target is now maneuvering erratically. It is losing airspeed. I am seeing a high angle of attack. He is going to stall. The response from Kaliningrad was no longer professional. It was frantic. Raven 4-1. We have 3 more targets launched from Estonia. NATO is flooding the sector. They are trying to overwhelm our radar. You have 30 seconds before the target enters the restricted zone of the naval base. Do not wait for a stall. If he does not turn in 10 seconds, you are to fire. 7:44 in the morning. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. General Thorn watched the altitude of the Typhoon on the main screen. It was climbing into the path of the morning commercial air corridors. The situation was no longer a tactical intercept. It was a potential mass casualty event. The Typhoon carried 2,000 pounds of unspent fuel and a full load of air-to-air missiles. If it crashed into a civilian airliner or a populated coastal city, the fallout would be catastrophic. Thorn keyed the long-range link. Guardian 1. This is control. You are authorized to use physical contact if necessary. Nudge him. Use your wingtip to force his wing down. Do not let him cross that line. The Russians are arming their systems. They will not wait. Inside the F-35, the American pilot gripped his stick. His eyes were fixed on the Typhoon's wing. He was now less than 1 meter away. At this distance, the two aircraft were effectively one mass of metal. The slightest tremor would cause them to lock together and disintegrate. Copy. Control. Guardian 1 replied. I am moving in for the nudge. Raven 4-1 is right behind me. He has his nose up. He is looking for a shot. 7:46 in the morning. The edge of Russian airspace. The physical border was now a visible reality. The coastline of Kaliningrad appeared as a dark, jagged line through the morning mist. The gray shapes of the Russian destroyers were clearly visible in the harbor below. On those ships, the crews were at general quarters. The anti-aircraft radars were emitting high-power signals that filled Volkov's cockpit with a constant, high-pitched chirping. Volkov reached for the master arm switch on his right-hand console. He flipped the red protective cover. He pressed the button. The head-up display in front of his eyes changed from green to a lethal, glowing red. A single word appeared in the center of his vision. Ready. The infrared seeker on his short-range missile was growling in his ears. It had a perfect lock on the heat from the Typhoon's twin engines. Volkov's heart was hammering against his ribs. He could see the American F-35 moving in, its wingtip almost touching the British jet. Control. I have a firing solution. 10 seconds to the border. I am waiting for the command. 5 seconds. The controller replied. 4, 3. The American F-35 surged forward. The pilot leaned his aircraft hard into the Typhoon. The two wings touched with a metallic screech that was audible even over the roar of the engines. The Typhoon shuddered. It tipped. For a second, the nose pointed away from the coast. Then, the British pilot's eyes snapped open. He did not look at his instruments. He did not look at his radio. He looked directly at the Russian fighter behind him. His hand gripped the stick and pulled back with everything he had. The Typhoon did not turn away. It roared upward in a vertical climb, heading straight into the path of an oncoming civilian transport. "He is active!" Volkov screamed. "The target is active and aggressive." The morning was no longer quiet. The crisis had reached its breaking point. 7:47 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The Typhoon was a vertical silver needle. It punched through 38,000 feet, 40,000. The British pilot was pulling back with a desperate, animal strength. Behind him, Major Volkov slammed his throttle into full afterburner. Two massive pillars of blue flame erupted from the Su-35. The Russian jet stood on its tail, chasing the Phantom into the thin, dark air of the upper atmosphere. Volkov spoke through gritted teeth. The G-force was a physical hand crushing his chest. "Control. Target is climbing. Angle of attack is 80 degrees. He is entering the civilian corridor. I have a Boeing 737 at 42,000 feet, 3 miles away. The air at this altitude was too thin for traditional maneuvers. The jets were flying on raw engine power." Volkov's vision began to gray at the edges. His flight suit squeezed his legs with agonizing force to keep the blood in his brain. On his display, a bright yellow icon representing 300 civilians was moving directly into the path of the climbing fighter. 7:48 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of the Boeing 737, the collision alarm began to wail. The captain looked out of his side window. He saw two white condensation trails rising toward him like surface-to-air missiles. He grabbed the yoke. He had no room to dive. He had no speed to climb. He was a spectator to his own potential destruction. 7:48 and 30 seconds in the morning. Raven 4-1. This is Control. You are cleared. The voice from Kaliningrad was no longer a person. It was the cold output of a military machine. Fire. Destroy the target before impact. You have 10 seconds. Volkov's hand was a block of stone. His finger took up the slack on the trigger. The red box on his head-up display was flashing. It was a perfect infrared lock. The tone in his ears was a solid, piercing scream. He was less than 1 second away from ending a life and starting a continental war. Guardian 1 to Raven 4-1. Do not fire. The American pilot's voice broke through the static of the emergency channel. He was pushing his F-35 to its absolute structural limit to catch the climb. Look at his tail. Look at the left elevon. It is a hard-over failure. He is not pulling the stick. The plane is doing it. Volkov focused his eyes. Even through the haze of 9 Gs, he saw it. The left control surface of the Typhoon was fluttering violently. It was a mechanical glitch. The British pilot was likely fighting to push the nose down, but the flight computer was slave to a ghost command. The aircraft was a runaway weapon. 7:49 in the morning. 5 seconds, Kaliningrad screamed. Volkov, fire now! The Boeing was now so close that Volkov could see the individual windows of the passenger cabin. He could see the logo on the tail. He looked at the Typhoon. He looked at his trigger. The Russian pilot made a choice that was not in any manual. He did not fire a missile. Instead, he rolled his Sukhoi inverted and punched his own speed brakes. He threw his massive jet directly into the path of the Typhoon's wake. The turbulence hit him like a mountain. The Sukhoi flipped. Volkov's head slammed against the canopy. The massive wake from the Russian engines washed over the Typhoon. 7:49 and 45 seconds in the morning. The civilian airliner roared overhead, missing the Typhoon by less than 50 meters. The wake of the Boeing, combined with the wash from the Sukhoi, it was a hammer blow of air. The Typhoon's nose finally dropped. The vertical climb ended. The British jet fell into a flat, screaming spin, tumbling toward the cold water of the Baltic below. "He is down," Volkov gasped. He was fighting to regain control of his own tumbling aircraft. Target is clear of the corridor. He is falling. The sky was suddenly empty of immediate threats. The civilian plane was safe. The border was still intact. But the Typhoon was falling at 400 miles per hour, with an unconscious pilot at the controls. 7:50 in the morning, the Baltic Sea. The Typhoon was a falling leaf of gray metal. It tumbled through 30,000 feet, then 25,000. Major Volkov fought his own controls as his Su-35 bucked in the thin air. He had traded his flight stability for the lives of 300 civilians. It was a gamble that had worked, but now he was watching a fellow pilot die in a flat spin that no human could recover from. "Control, this is Raven 4-1, Volkov shouted into his mask. He was breathing hard. "The target is in a terminal spin. I am descending to track the impact point." "Copy, Raven 4-1, Kaliningrad replied. The controller's voice was shaky. "We have the crash site projected 12 miles offshore. Search and rescue assets are launching from Baltisk." 7:51 in the morning. Inside the cockpit of Guardian 1, the American pilot watched his digital display. He was diving at Mach 0.9, chasing the falling British jet. He was looking for the white flash of an ejection seat. He was looking for a parachute. He saw neither. The Typhoon was falling through 15,000 feet. The centrifugal force of the spin would be pinning the British pilot against the side of the canopy with the weight of a ton of lead. Guardian 1 to Typhoon, the American called, "Eject, eject, eject." There was no answer, only the roar of the wind. Then, the world went black. It did not happen slowly. It happened with the clinical precision of a light switch being flipped. Inside Volkov's cockpit, the glowing green head-up display flickered once and died. The primary flight instruments turned into dark, empty glass. The radio hissed with a burst of static so loud it felt like a physical needle in his ears. Then, silence. Total, absolute electronic silence. 7:52. In the morning, Volkov stared at his hands. He could no longer hear his engines. He could no longer feel the hum of the fly-by-wire system. The Sukhoi-35 was a dead weight in the sky. He looked out of his canopy. To his left, the American F-35 was also faltering. Its sophisticated stealth skin looked dull in the morning light. The American pilot was frantically reaching for his manual backup systems. "What is this?" Volkov whispered. He looked down at the Typhoon. The British jet had stopped spinning. It had not recovered. It had simply stopped. The aircraft was now level, suspended at 10,000 feet as if held by an invisible hand. The engines were dark. The control surfaces were frozen. 7:53 in the morning. Below them, the Baltic Sea began to churn. The water was not reacting to the wind. It was rising in a perfect circular swell directly beneath the three paralyzed fighters. A massive surge of electromagnetic energy pulsed through the air. Volkov felt the hair on his arms stand up. His skin crawled, with the sensation of 1,000 tiny electric shocks. On the ground in Kaliningrad, every radar screen went white. At the command center in Ramstein, the giant wall map vanished into a sea of digital noise. The two greatest military powers on Earth were suddenly blind and deaf. The border did not matter. The missiles did not matter. For a radius of 50 miles, every piece of advanced technology had been neutralized by a force that did not belong to any nation on the map. Volkov gripped his mechanical backup stick. He looked at the American pilot through the glass of their canopies. The two rivals locked eyes. They were no longer combatants. They were two men in failing machines, staring at a phenomenon that defied every law of physics they had been taught. The Typhoon began to move. It was not flying. It was being pulled. The British jet began to slide through the air toward the center of the ocean swell. It moved with a smooth, silent velocity that bypassed the sound barrier without a sonic boom. "Control." Volkov tried to speak, but the radio was a dead piece of plastic. The morning was no longer quiet. It was filled with a low, vibrating hum that shook the very bones of the pilots. The pivot had arrived. The mission had changed. 7:54 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The silence in the cockpit was absolute. Major Volkov felt the lack of vibration through his seat as a physical ache. A modern jet fighter is a symphony of electronic noise, hums, and cooling fans. Now, there was only the rush of wind over the canopy. He was a glider pilot in a 20-ton brick of titanium. He grabbed the manual trim wheel, a mechanical backup designed for total electrical failure. It was stiff, resisting his frozen fingers. Volkov looked to his left. The American F-35 was drifting. Without its fly-by-wire computers, the stealth fighter was inherently unstable. He watched the American pilot fighting the stick, his movements frantic and visible through the glass. The two pilots were no longer representing their nations. They were two humans suspended in a gravity-defying void. 7:56 in the morning. In the command center at Kaliningrad, the lights had flickered and died. The backup generators groaned to life, but the screens remained black. The massive radar arrays on the coast were spinning, but they were sending back nothing but a wall of white noise. The sector commander stood in the dark. "Report status," he barked. "Nothing, sir," a technician replied. "Every satellite link is severed. The undersea cables are reporting a massive surge. It is not a jammer. A jammer has a frequency. This is like the air itself has become a conductor. We are blind for 200 kilometers. 7:58 in the morning. The Typhoon reached the center of the ocean swell. The British jet did not splash into the water. It stopped 10 meters above the surface, held in a shimmering column of distorted air. The water below was perfectly flat now, acting like a mirror. Volkov looked down from his altitude and saw the reflection of his own Sukhoi 35. But the reflection was wrong. In the water, his jet appeared to be fully powered, its afterburners glowing with a light that did not exist in the real sky. Volkov grabbed his emergency flare gun. He had no radio. He had no way to signal the American. He fired a single green flare into the air. A moment later, a red flare rose from the cockpit of the F-35. It was a primitive conversation. Green for "I am here," red for "I see it too." 8 o'clock in the morning. The column of light around the Typhoon intensified. The British aircraft began to turn. It was being rotated on its vertical axis by a force that ignored the laws of inertia. The pilot inside, the man Volkov had almost killed, was still slumped in his seat. Suddenly, the canopy of the Typhoon blew outward. The explosive bolts fired in slow motion, the glass shards hanging in the air like diamonds. The British pilot's seat did not eject. Instead, the man himself was lifted out of the cockpit. He floated in the center of the shimmering air, his flight suit rippling. Volkov watched, his breath fogging the inside of his dead mask. He saw the American pilot move his aircraft closer, attempting to enter the zone of the swell. The F-35 hit an invisible wall and bounced back, its wings flexing dangerously. The mystery was no longer a tactical problem. It was a biological one. The force was not interested in the machines. It was interested in the occupant. 8 o'clock and 2 minutes in the morning. The hum increased. It reached a frequency that shattered the glass of Volkov's backup instruments. He covered his ears, screaming into the silence of his mask. The light became a solid pillar of white, connecting the dark morning clouds to the deep Baltic water. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the pillar vanished. The Typhoon, now empty and without its canopy, dropped like a stone into the water. It vanished beneath the waves, with a massive plume of white spray. The British pilot was gone. The sea was empty. Volkov's head-up display suddenly flickered to life. The scream of his engines returned with a deafening roar as the fuel pumps re-engaged. The electronics of the Sukhoi 35 rebooted, filling his ears with 100 different warning tones. "Control! This is Raven 4-1!" Volkov shouted. "Do you copy? The target is down!" "I repeat, the Typhoon is in the water. Raven 4-1. We have you." The controller's voice was filled with a terrifying relief. "What happened? We lost you for 6 minutes. Where is the pilot?" Volkov looked at the spot where the light had been. The American F-35 was already banking away, its pilot heading west without a word. "The pilot is gone," Volkov said. "He did not eject. He was taken." The sky was blue again. The Baltic was cold and gray. The electronic war had returned to its normal, simmering state, but the two men in the air knew the truth. The border was a lie. 8:04 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The electronic heartbeat of the Su-35 was a chaotic mess of warnings. Major Volkov worked through his recovery checklist with trembling hands. One by one, the red lights on his dash turned to steady amber, then green. His radar swept the empty horizon. The Typhoon was gone. The white pillar was gone. The ocean below was a flat, dark mirror that revealed nothing of the machine it had swallowed. The American pilot in the F-35 broke the silence. His voice was thick with the same adrenaline-fueled shock. "Raven 4-1. This is Guardian 1. Confirm your status." Volkov took a breath. He looked at the dark gray jet to his left. "Guardian 1. This is Raven. My systems are functional. I have no contact with the target. I have no visual on the pilot. He did not hit the water. He was in the light. Then, he was not." The American pilot did not argue. He did not cite the laws of physics. "Copy. I have the same. My cameras were recording, but the files are corrupted. It is all digital noise." 8:07 in the morning. The Combat Information Center. In Kaliningrad, the sector commander stared at the restored tactical map. The blue and red icons were no longer merging. They were drifting apart. The urgency of the intercept had vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating confusion. The commander spoke into the secure line to Ramstein. "This is Kaliningrad. We are seeing a total loss of the British aircraft. Our pilot reports an anomalous event. Did your sensors record the surge?" General Thorne's voice was weary. "Kaliningrad. We recorded a surge that burned out 3 of our monitoring satellites. We have no telemetry from the Typhoon for the final 90 seconds. Our pilot is reporting things that do not align with our understanding of the environment. We are declaring a localized atmospheric event. For now." Both men knew the phrase atmospheric event was a lie. It was a word used to fill a hole in a report. It was a placeholder for something they could not name and did not want to acknowledge. 8:10 in the morning. The sky over the Baltic. Volkov turned his aircraft toward the Russian coast. He felt a strange sense of loss. He had spent the morning trying to decide whether to kill the man in the Typhoon. Now, he wished he had the chance to speak to him. He looked back one last time. The American F-35 was already a small, dark speck heading toward Germany. The radio crackled. "Raven 4-1. This is Control. Return to base. You are to proceed directly to the hardened hangar. Do not speak to the ground crew. Do not discuss the mission. Your flight data is being remotely seized." "Copy. Control," Volkov replied. He knew what would happen next. There would be rooms without windows. There would be men in suits asking him to repeat the same 3 minutes for 16 hours. They would tell him he was tired. They would tell him the sun and the oxygen deprivation had created a shared hallucination with the American. They would try to make the world make sense again. 8:15 in the morning. The Baltic Sea was once again a border. The ships returned to their patrol patterns. The radars began their rhythmic sweeping of the horizon. On the surface, nothing had changed. But deep in the digital logs of 2 rival nations, a gap of 6 minutes existed. The mystery was no longer in the sky. It was now in the silence of the governments. 8:20 in the morning. Kaliningrad Air Base. Major Volkov watched the gray concrete of the runway rise to meet his tires. The landing was hard. His hands were still vibrating with a fine, uncontrollable tremor. As the Su-35 slowed, he saw the black sedans of the State Security Service waiting at the end of the taxiway. There were no ground crews with waving batons. There were only men in heavy coats, standing motionless in the cold Baltic wind. Volkov taxied the aircraft into a hardened shelter. He shut down the engines. The silence that followed was heavy. It felt like a physical weight pressing against his eardrums. He sat in the cockpit for a long minute, staring at the empty HUD. He remembered the British pilot floating in the light. He remembered the Americans' red flare. Raven 4-1. Stay in the cockpit. 24 words. The radio crackled one last time. The technician is approaching to pull the data modules. Do not touch the canopy release until instructed. 8:25 in the morning. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. The F-35 Lightning touched down on the pristine tarmac. It was met with the same cold, sterile reception. Before the pilot could even unstrap, a team of specialized data analysts in white coveralls surrounded the jet. They were not checking for damage. They were looking for the digital footprint of a ghost. General Thorne watched the feed from a secure monitor. "Lock the room," he commanded. "Nobody leaves this center until the preliminary scrub is complete. This mission is now designated as a classified sensor failure. The pilot is to be briefed on the official narrative. He saw a mechanical malfunction. He saw a crash, nothing more." 8:45 in the morning. The Baltic Sea. The search and rescue fleet arrived at the last known coordinates of the typhoon. They found the oil slick. They found small fragments of carbon fiber floating on the surface. They found the empty flight helmet of the British pilot, bobbing in the swells like a discarded shell. A Russian destroyer and a German frigate sat 500 meters apart. They did not train their guns on each other. They did not exchange signals of defiance. Instead, they moved in a coordinated grid. Two professional crews working in a silence that was almost mournful. The rivalry of the morning had been replaced by a shared, hollow realization. 8:52 in the morning. The Kaliningrad Command Center. The sector commander sat at his desk. He was looking at a single printed photograph. It was a frame captured from Volkov's wing camera. It showed the Typhoon suspended in the air, the pilot illuminated by a light that had no source. "Is this the only copy?" the commander asked. "The only one that wasn't corrupted, sir," the intelligence officer replied. The commander picked up a heavy metal lighter. He held the edge of the photograph to the flame. He watched the white light in the picture turn into black ash. "Delete the server. The pilot will sign the statement." He nearly fired on a NATO aircraft due to a radar glitch. He was redirected by his own command. The Typhoon suffered a catastrophic structural failure. That is the history of this day. And the American, sir? He saw the same thing. "The Americans will write the same report," the commander said. "They have no more desire to explain the impossible than we do. We are in the business of certainty, and there is no certainty in that light." The crisis had resolved. The borders were restored. The world remained as it was, built on the steady, comfortable lies of men in power. 11:30 in the morning. A windowless room in Kaliningrad. Major Volkov sat under the hum of a single fluorescent light. 3 hours had passed since his tires touched the runway. He had not been allowed to wash the sweat from his face, or remove his flight suit. Across the metal table sat a colonel in a dark uniform. The colonel did not have a name tag. He only had a folder filled with the telemetry data Volkov had just risked his life to collect. The colonel tapped a finger on a graph. "Major, review your statement. You claim the Typhoon aircraft exhibited a flight profile that contradicts the laws of aerodynamics. You claim the pilot was removed from the cockpit by an external force. Is this your final testimony?" Volkov looked at the man. He saw the reflection of the light in the colonel's glasses. "I reported what I saw through my canopy. I reported what the American pilot saw. Our sensors were neutralized, but our eyes were not. Your eyes were under 9 Gs of pressure," the colonel replied. His voice was as cold as the sea. "The human brain creates patterns where none exist. You were in a high-stress intercept. You saw a tragic mechanical failure. The British pilot was lost to the water. The light you describe was a high-altitude electrical discharge, a rare but documented weather phenomenon." Volkov leaned forward. A weather phenomenon does not hold a 20-ton fighter jet level while its engines are dead. A weather phenomenon does not choose which pilot to take. The colonel closed the folder. The sound was like a pistol shot in the small room. In the official record, it does. You are a hero of the Federation, Volkov. You prevented a collision with a civilian airliner. You showed restraint. That is the story the world will hear. If you persist with this talk of pillars and floating pilots, you will not be a hero. You will be a medical case. Do you understand? Volkov felt the weight of the state settling on his shoulders. He thought of the American pilot. He knew the same conversation was happening in a similar room in Germany. The two men who had shared the most profound moment in human history were being silenced by the very nations they served. I understand, Volkov said, 3 days later. Brussels and Moscow. The strategic fallout was handled with a surgical precision that matched the intercept itself. A joint statement was issued. It spoke of a tragic loss of life. It blamed a faulty flight control computer in the early model Typhoon. It praised the professional deconfliction between the Russian and NATO pilots. There was no mention of the F-35. There was no mention of the 6-minute electronic blackout. On the news, analysts spoke of the incident as a reminder of the dangers of close proximity flying. They talked about the need for better communication. They discussed the technical specifications of the Typhoon's elevons. They filled the air with facts to hide the truth. But in the deep basements of military intelligence, the analysis was different. Experts from both sides were looking at the same corrupted files. They were seeing a mathematical pattern in the static. It was not a random surge. It was a code. It was a signature left by something that had mapped their most advanced systems in seconds and found them wanting. The geopolitical tension did not vanish. It grew. But it was no longer a tension between East and West. It was the shared, silent fear of two predators who had realized they were both being watched by something much higher on the food chain. The Baltic was once again a place of secrets. The water covered the wreckage. The silence covered the rest. 6 months later, the shoreline of Kaliningrad, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Baltic Sea was a bruised purple under the weight of a coming winter storm. Major Volkov stood on the edge of a concrete pier, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a heavy wool coat. He was no longer wearing a flight suit. He was no longer assigned to the frontline interceptor squadron. Following the events of that April morning, his flight status had been permanently suspended. Officially, it was for medical reasons. Unofficially, it was because he was a man who had seen the impossible and refused to call it a weather phenomenon. The military analysis of the Baltic incident would remain one of the most classified documents in human history. In the corridors of the Kremlin and the halls of the Pentagon, the event was studied not as a tactical failure, but as a strategic warning. The data modules recovered from Volkov's Su-35 and the American F-35 showed something the generals could not ignore. During those 6 minutes of total electronic darkness, both nations' automated retaliatory systems had been primed to fire. The algorithms had detected the loss of contact as a precursor to a nuclear first strike. On 3 different continents, the machinery of global destruction had begun its countdown. The only thing that stopped the launch was not a failsafe or a computer code, it was the human brake. Volkov had chosen to fly into the wake of the Typhoon instead of firing a missile. The American pilot had chosen to nudge a falling jet with his own wingtip instead of retreating to safety. It was these 2 moments of individual, irrational bravery that had confused the automated systems long enough for the blackout to end. The strategic assessment was clear. The more advanced our weapons became, the more fragile the peace remained. The machines were ready for war. The humans were the only ones still holding the line. Volkov looked out at the horizon. He thought about the British pilot. To the public, the man was a tragic casualty of a mechanical failure. His name was engraved on a stone in a quiet village in England. His name was engraved on a stone in a quiet village in England. But Volkov knew the truth. That pilot was the first contact. That pilot was the first contact. He was the passenger in a vehicle that bypassed every defense ever built by man. The American pilot, call sign Guardian 1, had resigned his commission shortly after the debriefings. Intelligence reports suggested he was now living in a remote part of Montana, far from any radar towers or satellite links. Like Volkov, he had realized that the sky was no longer a place of national pride. It was a place where something else was watching the border. It was a place where something else was watching the border. The Baltic Sea remained silent. The ships of the Russian fleet moved through the dark water. The Baltic Sea remained silent. The ships of the Russian fleet moved through the dark water. The NATO jets patrolled the high corridors. The game of posturing and shadowboxing continued, but the rules had changed forever. Both sides now knew that they were not the apex predators of the atmosphere. Both sides now knew that they were not the apex predators of the atmosphere. They were merely tenants in a space governed by forces they could not track and could not stop. They were merely tenants in a space governed by forces they could not track and could not stop. Volkov turned away from the water. The first flakes of snow began to fall, disappearing into the dark surf. Modern warfare is often defined by the power of the strike or the speed of the intercept. Modern warfare is often defined by the power of the strike or the speed of the intercept, but history would be decided by a different metric. It was decided not by who fired first, but by those who chose not to fire at all. It was decided not by who fired first, but by those who chose not to fire at all. The morning of the incident was a memory now. The morning of the incident was a memory now, buried under layers of official lies and redacted files. But as Volkov walked back toward the city, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had looked into the light, and he had seen the end of the world. He had looked into the light, and he had seen the end of the world. He had chosen to blink, and because he did, the world was still there to meet the winter.